In this video, we're going to cover how to find vertical asymptotes using a graphing calculator. And as always, I have a TI-84 plus CE, but a lot of what I say will be similar for other calculators. And I've got a function ready to go to help me. Let's do 1 over x plus 2. And let's start by graphing that. So let's hit y equals. Now again, if you've got one of the more modern calculators like I do, you can type it in as a fraction. So if I hit alpha, y equals, I get this little menu, and I'm going to pick that first option, n over d. I have other videos about how to do this in more detail. And as a reminder, if you don't have a newer calculator like I do, you can type that in with just the division sign, but we'll put parentheses around the numerator and then parentheses around the denominator. So let's go ahead and hit graph to see what that looks like. So there's my graph. Now if we remember how to find vertical asymptotes, I'm going to just use VA for short here. That is where our denominator is equal to 0. So if I remember this algebraically, I'm expecting to have my vertical asymptote at -2. But let's say I either don't know that, or I'm taking a test, I've forgotten that, and I want to use my calculator to help me out. So first of all, I can use that graph to approximate. I'm expecting there to be some sort of weird gap here, vertically. That is what a vertical asymptote is. And if we look at approximately -2, yeah, something weird has definitely happened. I was going down here on the left-hand side, but then I suddenly jumped up here on the right-hand side. So definitely something weird is happening at -2. I can also use the table, which is one of my favorite ways. So I'm going to go ahead and hit second and then graph to pull up that table. And you'll notice I have a variety of options, but the one I'm really focusing in on is that underneath the table, when x is -2, for the y, I'm given an error message. If we remember some of our basic definitions, we are never supposed to divide by 0. That's basically why a vertical asymptote occurs, because I'm putting in a number, that means I end up dividing by 0. But because I'm not allowed to do that, that's why I've got the error message in my calculator. So I often tell my students, go ahead and just go to that table and look for those error messages. Chances are, those error messages are my vertical asymptotes. Now, I'm going to do another function in a moment here, but before I do that, let's do one more thing with this first function I've pulled up, which is I'm going to go to the calc menu. So I'm going to hit second and then trace. There's a lot of things I can do under that calc menu. So let's hit second trace to pull it up. Now, I don't have anything for finding asymptotes under here, but I do have something for value. So let's go ahead and pick one for value. What that will allow me to do is if I type in an x number, it's going to give me the y number that goes with it. So for example, if I hit x equals 0, it will then tell me it's at 0, and then 1/2 is y. It's the same thing I'd get for the table, but sometimes we get extra things that show up. Because, as I always tell students, you'll notice the default for that table is my x values are only integers. I can scroll up and down and get more integers, but as a default, it is just integers. Now, I do have a different video that shows you how to change it, but as normal, we do have just integers here. So what happens if I want the number for something that I don't see in my table? So let's say for this one, I'm going to go to second calc again and hit value. So if, for example, I want to know the y value when x is 1/2, I can just type in 1/2 and hit enter. And this is a nice way to get a y value for x values that don't show up on that table. This applies to fractions as well as things with even radicals. And what happens, though, if I type in this number? So let's do it one more time. Let's go to second trace, and then let's hit value. So what happens if I type in -2? I don't have a y value here. It's blank. this is, once again, I'm going to interpret this as an error. So if there's no y value, that means this is probably a vertical asymptote. If it's a rational function, it is almost certainly going to be a vertical asymptote. So let's look at a function like this. So let's go ahead and type that in. So alpha y equals 1 over 2x plus 3. Again, let's start with that graph. I always like to have a picture before I begin. Now, maybe that's at -2. I don't think it's quite at -2. It looks like somewhere between -2 and -1. It's always harder to tell if it's not an exact number, but somewhere in there, something funky is happening. So again, I maybe don't know it exactly, but I'm hopefully pretty confident that I at least do have a vertical asymptote. So again, the first thing I do is go to my table. So let's hit second table, and I'm looking for an error message, probably somewhere between -2 and -1, but I don't see an error message. So that's where I'm going to pull this value out. So let's go back to the graph, and let's hit second calc. Now, if I found this by hand, I would set that denominator equal to 0, and it should be at -3/2. So let's pick value, and let's type in -3 divided by 2, which is the same as -1.5. You can type it in either way. I tend to think in fractions rather than decimals. And let's hit enter. Now my calculator does turn it into a decimal because the calculator likes the decimal better. But you'll notice, just as before, I've got the x value, but there's no y value here as I try to find that value. So again, I'm going to interpret this the same as that error message. And this is how my calculator is telling me that this is a vertical asymptote. So again, it does not tell me it directly. It does not say this is a vertical asymptote. I have to use the graph, the table, the value as clues that my calculator is giving me, and then I interpret that as my vertical asymptote.